Welcome to Panelism, a podcast where we talk about the comics and graphic novels we're reading. I'm Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask.
Good evening, Taylor Trask.
Good evening. It's Halloween, Todd.
It is, in fact, Halloween. I wonder if this is like a spooky episode to listen to on the night of Halloween.
It's New Comics Day and Halloween, so it's that wonderful, it's like every 85 years, I believe, that comes around.
That is exactly New Comic Book Day plus Halloween. It's like Halley's Comet coming,
That's right. Yeah,
Put on your Nikes and join the Heaven's Gate cult. We will all reach out for. Actually, that was the Hail Bop comic.
Yeah, Hail Bob. Yep.
It's funny because a little behind the scenes, we record 2 episodes in a day, and it's not the day that we release them. So in the last episode, you totally threw me off because you were like, "Whew, an election day has passed," and I forgot that you were timing it like you knew that this episode would come out afterwards. And I was like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And then in this one, you said it's Halloween, and I was like, "No, I mean just because I went to a Halloween party." Oh, right. Anyway. As you were listening to this, it is.
By the way, quick little observation. As it would turn out, the Doe, I believe his name was, the leader of Heaven's Gate, looks exactly like Johnny Carson in many of his promotional
videos.
Yeah, I encourage you to go, if you want to just kind of go down that rabbit hole, Google Doe, Heaven's Gate, and just look at him, then pull up a Google of Johnny Carson too. Anyway, Todd, continue.
I think he looks like Martin Kernston from Parks and Recreation. You know him as Kernston's Nipple King.
Oh my God, that guy.
The guy that cuts his own hair.
Yeah. Oh, you were so right. Oh my God.
Also, he does look like Johnny Carson. I always picture that Doe is like, 5'1". Just short of stature. So I don't actually know how tall Doe is.
Well, it doesn't matter now.
And Kernston, Martin Kernston is a tall person.
I have Martin Kernston pulled up right now too. You're so right.
I had to look. I was Googling frantically when you said Johnny Carson. I was like, "Oh, what Kernston Nipple King? What's his name?"
Yeah.
Anyway, it's a perfect night to talk about a spooky book,
which we don't know a lot of. By the way, I was looking at. I was like, we don't really cover a lot of horror in these episodes, so it's good to finally get to some.
That's actually I'm sorry for this diversion, but are you a horror fan? Are you a fan of horror literature or movies?
Not usually. I respect the genre, and if it's something like Get Out, yes, absolutely, like that, love it. Or the Blair Witch, which a lot of people crap on, but that movie was the first found footage movie of like the new era. Yeah. I know other people, there's like a couple that came out before and very, very, very indie. This was like the first, global release kind of thing. So like all that to be said, the genre, like The Ring, I'll not watch. I don't like disturbing kind of just horrific imagery. I kind of like something that's more thought-provoking, maybe topical, doesn't have to be. Could be supernatural, could be comedy, but very, very specific tastes.
Yeah, I think our tastes are similar in that of like, I like maybe I like suspense more. Like I don't like a jump scare movie or like a gory movie. But if it were, if the main theme of the movie was like just suspense and that kind of fright, then I might, a jump scare here or there, or like some gore is not as bothersome as like when it's just an orgy of gore and violence, that.
The movies that use my own mind against me. So the beauty about Blair Witch is that they never show you the witch. So your mind puts something there that's probably way more awful than anything they would have come up with anyway. And so it's like just that idea that the less is more approach, where it's like the suspense fits that, thriller fits that. If it's violent, that's okay, but it doesn't have to be. I think just the idea that the intellectual pursuit of horror, I think, is where I really kind of
Man, I'll tell you, I made a few days ago. I thought The Shining is playing in a local art theater here, and I was totally going to go see it today, and then today called an audible and said, no, I'm going to go work for 3 hours. I can't take myself out of the freelance biz for 3 hours. And then I didn't work for 3 hours. So I should have gone to see The Shining, because that to me is like, first of all, finally someone fixed Stephen King.
We were going to have an entire
that's just me trolling Stephen King fans.
Well, that's trolling me too, because you and I could have an entire episode about why that's nonsense. Go ahead.
No, but I think it is such a great movie, and like so suspenseful and creepy, and I really, that hits all my buttons of like,
Kubrick
that's
did an amazing, like as a Kubrick movie, he made it his own in a beautiful way.
Yeah.
Like it's, the symmetry of everything, and that's just it. Like so many of those scenes were more creepy because of the art of the filmmaking.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, there's a I don't know if it's like specifically was on Vimeo, but I know somebody did a super cut of his one point, like forced perspective or whatever that's called.
Yeah.
And how much he uses it. But I've seen it done. I think I've seen a special cut that's just The Shining's forced perspective stuff. And it's like, oh my God. There's like the elevator spilling the blood and Danny riding through the floors. And sorry, anyway. Plus, also, I just want to say, as a confession for Kubrick faking the moon landing footage, The Shining is really just top notch. Room 237, shout out there.
God.
Terrible documentary about some really stupid theories.
But it's you know what though, that doc, it's usually on Netflix. They kind of come.
Yeah.
That's usually where you can find it. I love it because it's just it was fascinating to see these 5 or 6 people have a completely different take. That they were all insane takes, but they were completely different from one another.
And it's not a terrible documentary. It's just clear that like they didn't really have the rights to use a lot of footage or something like that. So it's kind of like it relies heavily on just crazy people telling you crazy things, and you're like, oh man, back it up. Like we need a visual on this. Yeah, boy, I'll tell you another great suspenseful film is not the current movie. I think there's a current movie called I Think We're Alone Now. But on Vimeo, there's for sure a documentary about 2 or 3 people that are obsessed with the singer Tiffany, and it's called I Think We're Alone Now. And it's a for-real documentary, but it's suspenseful and very scary. Anyway, I picked for this Halloween book the book that I had my picking done for me. I just picked what my book club picked as their monthly read for October. So I'm talking about Harrow County. Volume 1, which is called Countless Haints. And surprisingly, a thing that came up in the discussion at the book club was that many people did not know that Haints was sort of a word for ghosts or spirits. And there's this brief discussion of like, oh, wow, is that a regional thing? Did I sort of know that word because of growing up in the South? I don't remember anyone saying it, but it didn't throw me. Anyway, it's written by Cullen Bunn. And art by Tyler Cook. It's published by Dark Horse, and volume 1 came out 3 years ago, but I believe this title is still going. So this was released in November 2015. Let me give you that back cover synopsis, which, like the one that I read for Domino, will not explain anything to you about.
Trend with you, man.
Emmy always knew that the woods surrounding her home crawled with ghosts and monsters, but on the eve of her 18th birthday, she learns that she is connected to these creatures and to the land itself in a way she never imagined. Collecting the first 4 issues of the Southern Gothic fairy tale from the creator of the smash hit The Sixth Gun, beautifully and hauntingly realized by BPRD's Tyler Crook. Cullen Bunn wrote The Sixth Gun, which has like a lot of people in the book club were familiar with that and really love that. I don't know anything about it. And BPRD is, of course, a Hellboy spinoff with the Bureau of Paranormal Research and something. Sorry.
I am especially interested in this book because it has been on my list for a little while. Yeah. It's one of those I'm like, oh, I've got to read this soon, and it's just kind of keeps getting bumped for various reasons, and because it is kind of going back to our original point, because it is horror, I kind of have to feel there's a time and a place. I can't take it just whenever. So it's been on my list, and it's one of those titles that came out right as I was getting back into comics hardcore again.
And it does, because I was a little wary when I knew like we're going to pick a horror book, and and because I'm not a big reader of it and it's hard to do suspense, although we're going to find out in next week's episode that you have a great suspense horror thriller
That's
pick.
right.
That I just didn't really know what I was getting into, and I found myself really interested in this. It is Southern Gothic. It is I believe it's sort of a vague place and time, but it is past the turn of the century, but not, it's hard. It would be hard for me to say what year this is like takes place in exactly. Olden times or something. But there's definitely modernization. There's cars and things like that. But you definitely feel like this is a rural farm life. Many decades before modernity or something. It's not it's not just the 80s or something.
Yeah, it was running around with like cell phones and stuff like.
Right, exactly. No, and which is always one of those things of like they don't have to deal with those electronics and stuff. Yeah. And Emmy, so the reason I said that back cover copy doesn't really tell you about it is that this idea of like on the eve of her 18th birthday, she learns that she is connected to these creatures. It's not accurate because she doesn't necessarily learn that. We learn that. And then the other paragraph about it collects the first 4 issues. There's definitely sorry to jump to one of my conclusive thoughts here, but there's definitely like a sort of a pacing issue that becomes apparent because it is 4 issues. And like I said to you off the air, it's, I was telling you to sort of police me in how far I go, because it's like talking about, a suspenseful Halloween tale like Stranger Things, which I think is like, if you liked that, this book will appeal to you because you don't want to talk about episode 4. But because this trade paperback only has 4 issues in it, there's sort of a feeling of like, it's just, I don't know. I just would say it wasn't paced right. It's okay, like,
well, let me ask you this, because one of my biggest sort of the reasons I'm kind of hesitating, there have been how many trades so far?
I think 5?
8.
Wait.
I'm seeing 8.
8. Oh my gosh, I was way off. I'm sorry.
So is this something that each trade is like a little mini anthology, or is it like, chapter 1 of a continuous linear story that we're just in the very early days of, so like we don't even know what to expect yet?
I'm sorry that I can't answer that definitively.
Oh no,
but
is that a spoiler? Or?
No. I just because I just don't know like how long they're intending.
But at the end of this volume that like, oh, this story is done for now, and
so I think that's part of the pacing problem is that and there's a funny a physical trick to that, which is, so Cullen Bunn originally envisioned this as like a novella that he would release chapters of on his website, just prose. And so he's included like a chapter or 2, I can't remember how long, of like, I mean, there's a big portion of this book is that original novella. So you can see how the ideas developed sort of in the behind the scenes footage at the end of the book. But that plus their sketches for the book are almost equal to the actual content of the story. So when you're holding the book in your hand, you feel like I've got another half of this book left to read. And then all of a sudden it ends and you're like, wait, what?
Wow. Interesting.
So it does not get wrapped up. What I heard from other book club members was that volume 2 will answer a lot of those questions because they went ahead and read that. So it sounds like if you at all get into the first volume, immediately go out and pick up volume 2.
Well, here's an interesting little aside. I'm looking at the page counts and, oh no, I'm sorry. That's extras. It looks like the extras vary wildly between volumes. Like I'm looking at like the 24 page extra, volume 2, 17 pages. That's interesting. I wonder if they originally were going to go like, issues 1 through 5 or 1 through 6 for volume 1. And they didn't, they got off their timing a little, or they got, renewed for more. It's a Dark Horse property. So they, they kind of have a little bit more runway to plan things.
It does. Well, it's weird too, because I think there's such a deliberate, we talk about image books so much, and even Marvel and DC, there are deliberate like almost where it's 5 or 6 issues to wrap up an arc. And I think this one was now mostly this is a guess, but it doesn't end like the, if there were one more issue in this trade, I still don't think you would be satisfied. So I think they're ending at the right point for this chapter, but you just don't, it's not resolved to you, the reader. But anyway, back to the story. There is this girl Emmy. It opens. The story opens with the townspeople murdering a witch in like the worst way. It's like they've shot her, they've stabbed her, they've hung her, and then they're setting her on fire with gasoline.
Okay.
But even at this point, when she would be dead and they are lighting her on fire, she, like, this ghostly voice comes out of her. So all the townspeople know that they've basically been cursed, and they're sort of wondering when that curse will reappear. And there's this little girl that this couple has adopted. There are some strange circumstances to that, which I won't get into, but they've adopted her. And so everyone is there's sort of this hidden secret in the town of like, they're watching her, and they're wondering, like, when she turns 18, is she, or what, is the witch spirit or powers or something going to manifest? So that on one hand sounds very like horror witch story, spooky story, but it also has those reflections of, like, to me, like the mutants from the X-Men, of like, that because of what they already believe about this girl, they're already sort of making her an outcast and an other. But she doesn't know why. It's sort of like, why is everybody so concerned about my birthday? So some of these strange things start happening around her 18th birthday, and Pa, her adoptive father, recognizes them and is pretty sure that he knows what's happening. But you as the reader are not really let in on that exactly. I mean, you can put the pieces together pretty easily, but there's not even like a voiceover or narrative anything that says, Pa wondered about this, or Pa never talks to Ma about it. It just sort of, you see it happen and you go, oh, it's weird that these animals keep dying on the farm. So she ends up going on this adventure, which is like a classic horror movie of like, she has to venture into the woods, but it's, it's told to you as she's going into it, and it's super spooky that, she's been through these woods a million times, and she grew up playing in these woods, and she knows these woods. So there's definitely this feeling of like, something's different out there now. And she's wandering in, like, she doesn't even know what that different thing is. But we, the reader, are already, like, our guard's already up. And so the other big thing that comes out, quite explicitly is, will this outcast person, will their special powers be developed for good or evil? Once she makes peace with the fact that, she is connected, as the back cover copy says, to these, ghosts and monsters and creatures. Is she destined to turn out like the old witch that they burned? Or could she be, could she use this, like, sort of these mystical powers for the town, for the good? And that feeling of too, like, of that, sorry, let me just say this one last thing, is that also the thing that we can all relate to, which is like, as you're turning 18 and you're in a small town or something, is your fate already decided for you? How do you get away from that? So sorry, jump into your point.
Well, because as you're saying that out loud, I'm looking at some of the art examples and like some of the creatures and things she interacts with, and some of them are horrific looking.
Yeah.
And I'm like, if I was a townsperson and saw even a glimpse of this, I'd be like, well, clearly she's terrible. What the hell? Like, are we meant to think that these are sort of fun, kind of quirky relationships, almost cartoonish? Or is it, are these dangerous creatures to her too? Like, I'm trying to understand.
No. And I think that's another issue with the pacing of, is that because there's just 4 issues in this, volume, there's some things that I wish it had lingered on for longer. Like, they could have done 2 more issues and ended in the same point, I think. And we could have seen her shock and terror at these creatures, or that weird internal acceptance she has of these creatures. It's not not played for like quirkiness or, at all in like a humorous, cute relationship or something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she does meet horrific creatures, and while she's sort of startled by them, it's just hard because of that rush through it of, with the innocent child who's like, she's, it's made clear that did not go to school. She worked on the farm and, sort of learned to read from the Bible and stuff like that. And so she's not educated. Well, would this young girl be so naive, when she approaches these things, or would she have a natural fear of them because of what was instilled in her? I don't, again, maybe that comes in later books, but I do think it could have been paced out better in this first volume. I would have liked to have read 2 more issues of a comic, exploring that.
Yeah. I mean, how do you feel about that in general? Just that idea. Do you feel that like if you're a creator and you're going into a series, do you treat the trade volumes like seasons, so that there's, they can be part of a greater arc, but they have to be self-contained as a volume? Do you feel, because I'm just thinking myself, like, the things like Wicked and Divine, where that's obviously the case, it works so much better. And I've other series that I'm like, I don't know.
And I think a thing that, although, you've recently covered several books from other indie presses that we don't, touch on a lot. Oni Press jumps to mind. You just did something from them. Is that, as I read this, I was like, wait, am I too far into that Image Comics, trope or their sort of box where, you're getting 6 issues and it feels like a season, and you're going to get a conclusion, but also a cliffhanger, and, you're going to meet a new character or something. And is that where my mind, like the pattern, I want that pattern to emerge in this? And maybe Dark Horse just tells stuff differently. Maybe it is more of that Hellboy BPRD feeling of like, we're just going to talk about paranormal stuff and it's going to be ongoing. I don't really know how to sum that up as like, if I were to put myself in the creator's shoes, because I also don't know, what the publisher demanded or how they felt about it. And it's probably different when you're writing single books, but as a reader, and part of that is, like I said, just sort of that weird bait and switch of you're holding a book and then you don't necessarily realize that 24 pages are behind the scenes material, like if I had done it again, I would go put my thumb where bonus material appears, so that I would know, like, actually it's only these pages that are the story, and then I wouldn't be anticipating.
Okay, I'm so glad you said this, because and I didn't bring this. We just recorded my episode that I picked, but the same book had, I was reading it on Kindle, and I had, Kindle, much like page count, you can see like, oh, you're at page 1. And this particular book had 170 pages. And by the time I got to like 120, I was like, is this starting to end, or is this a new left turn? And I kind of I wish if I had known that, like, I only had 10 pages left, I would have been thinking about it or anticipating it in a different way.
And that is weird how we approach that,
Yeah.
Like, I think just sort of like mentally, put it out like that. So and what's interesting to me too, is that there was a, I mean, it wasn't like emphatic, but there was definitely like a meh, like response to this in the book club of, some people liked it. The people that read volume 2 really liked where that went. I liked it. And some people were they just didn't like the art, or they just couldn't get into the story. They liked the novella story better. And it's interesting because a couple months earlier, we had read this book that we did on the podcast called My Blacks Don't Match, which is super crazy because it's just not, the narrative is not there at all. It's like a bunch of assembled sort of web comics that don't really tell a story. They're just about the same set of characters in the same setting. And it was just weird to see that people were much more excited about that than about this, which I think is probably true of like horror and suspense anyway, is, if you're not into the premise, like if you're not hooked into it and feeling the suspense, you're not going to, get the same stuff out of it, which is.
Tell me more about the art itself. Like, is that just?
Oh yeah,
it seems pretty unique.
It is unique in that it's watercolored. And so it looks like it has a very pastoral autumnal palette. It's just a lot of like sort of the earth tones in it. um and which works really really well. And then there are times where something supernatural happens, and all of a sudden there's like a really bright primary color palette, and that too threw some people off. I definitely preferred the muted autumnal colors. When the bright primary stuff comes out, it's kind of shocking, sort of throws you out of it or something. But they actually go into that a little bit in the behind the scenes stuff in their sketches, and it made me see it a different way of like, oh yeah, that does really stand out, like this is a supernatural thing happening, and really highlights it. And actually does this interesting thing where the supernatural thing is the very bright thing, and the humans in it are the like muted tones, instead of the other way around.
Because I'm looking at some of these scenes, and there are some creepy imagery, but then like there's some characters that are almost like looking straight at you out of a panel, and it's a little unsettling. But it's drawn and kind of like reminded me of the cover of the Neil Gaiman book Coraline. Not the art you see for the movie cover, but like his book cover kind of has that similar sort of vibe where it's kind of almost like handcrafted in the 1800s kind of feeling to it. Can't explain it any other way, but to take that sort of style and then sort of like give it just 10% creepy. It's something.
It's very. I mean, you can. I'm glad you said it that way, because it definitely feels like they're in that 1800s or whatever, that sort of like antiqued vibe of the art. But then they're just sort of, they can turn the knob up. It's like a Photoshop filter of like, let's just warm these colors up. And because there's a very creepy episode with this townsperson named Mr. Sorrel. And anyone who's read this would attest to like how creepy it is. I mean, there's it's the undertones of this thing. It's like he ostensibly looks like he's rescuing her, and the colors around him are very pink and very like pastel, and like his cheeks are very pink and his hair is very white, and his I think he's wearing like a bright blue sweater, and he just it's the cute towns person. He's just the old kindly old man. But you quickly realize like he hasn't rescued her or like helped her out. It's almost like a kidnapping, and to this young girl who's 17 years old, and you go like, oh shit, what is about to happen? And in that sense, it's like the color palette is just twisted a little bit to make him look really nice and innocent, and she's still in sort of the gloom and the darkness. But it's played for opposites, because in that moment you're like, oh my god, he is the evil person, what is going on here? You're totally scared for her. And in the same way, there are some flashbacks where the flashbacks are very very monochrome, where it's like just a mud color, and it's just played off like the darks and lights in that color, or the grays or whatever. So yeah, I ended up really liking the way it's colored. But I think that watercolor thing, it's sort of like in Descender, where it I talked about this in our podcast about Descender, where the first time I read it, where I was reading the full page, I didn't really appreciate all the details in it. But when I reread it on digital and had that guided view through it, I was definitely so much more into the art in a strange way. I like the display of the art in the print version, but liked being able to follow the story and how the art related to it in the digital version. And I think this one, if you flip the page and you see the full layout, and there will be like one panel where, the facial features are just kind of vague because it's been watercolored. But, the next panel down will be a very detailed, monster that's rendered. And, I think that just sort of throws people off. But overall, for me, that art really worked for it. So I ended up really enjoying it. I think I will read volume 2 for sure, just to follow up on this arc and see where it goes. And I was, promised by the people who had read it that like some stuff is going to be delivered on, and not wrapped up, but expanded so that you're going to get from volume 2 like, oh, we didn't even consider this. So.
Yeah. Well, let me know if you do, because that may impact whether or not I go down this road. I'm kind of on a fence. I don't know. Not that your review I took as negative necessarily, but I have more questions now than I think I did before. So.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I don't want to change it. I think that's, I don't want to like, it's good every now and then to have a book that's kind of like, I feel ambiguous about.
Yeah.
It's, we do a lot of books where we're just enthusiastic. We try to avoid stuff that we just think sucks. So I wouldn't mention this if I didn't think it were super interesting.
Oh, of course. Yeah. But, that's purely a personally subjective sort of view. That's not a judge of the quality. So much as just like, is this something that's is this going to maybe unsettle me too much? I don't know.
I don't think it's like that creepy, but you've dialed into that ambiguous feeling I had about it,
Yeah.
So, but I really, like I said, I have a great appreciation for it, and I want to see what happens in volume 2. It's hard for me to paint that in like more enthusiastic terms, but I think if you're interested in that subject matter, in just a creepy kind of ghost story that, it has a lot of traditional elements, but I would say not only Stranger Things, but it's also got, in a weird way, it's got an X-Files vibe to it.
Oh, okay.
It's got that, I can't remember what the, Chris Carter had this awesome quote about, he said, we often joke about like an episode of the X-Files is a couple of flashlight scenes and then something else, but that's almost what you feel in this, is like, it's got that out in the woods scene where, she's got a lantern, that she douses, and then her friend Bernice shows up with her lantern, and, and you've that feeling of like that very horror movie feeling or X-Files feeling of like, you're surrounded by darkness and you only have this one little point of light.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're into that kind of horror, which is more of like a ghost story, and granted with some really creepy monsters, that you also can't like the monsters too. There's definitely one that's like very real, and there's certainly the witch that's very real, and then there's some, there's just sort of these like references in that, like, they're even visually represented where you're not quite sure if that creature is real or right there, or but creepier rather than scary and bloody. But really enjoyed it, and it's a great Halloween book, and certainly like even going into November, like,
that's great. And I'm glad we could finally do a themed episode. That was
kidding.
That lines up perfectly with the holiday, but also just the nature of the content works. It was good. And
we've already recorded it, but you've got kind of a themed episode coming up next. So next week we've got another themed episode. There's
an election coming, and there's sort of a tangential election. It's not Citizen Jack, so it's not like it's so on the nose.
Right.
But there's definitely an election kind of connection. If you are so interested. So stay tuned for that. Also stay tuned and find us anywhere podcasts are downloaded, or on Apple, Stitcher, Google Play, Pocket Casts, and anywhere else you can find podcasts. Search for Panelism. And if you need to add with Todd and Taylor, go ahead. But I think Panelism works just as is.
I think we're good now. And we're on Instagram as panelism.inc. So put that in the name. And you can also find us on the web at panelism.inc. That is a new domain. And I forgot to give you this feedback off the air, so I'll give it to you right now, which is I told somebody at the Halloween party the name of our podcast, and he went, "Oh, that's good."
Good. Yay. See? The public has spoken in my mind. That's all I needed to hear.
I don't know that we've gotten such a quick and decisive praise from one of our many, many podcast names as I did last night. So let's feel good about that.
I do. Yeah, the more I hear it, the more I like it. So glad we've got it.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining me again, Taylor, and thanks for joining us, listeners. And please reach out and tell us what you'd like to hear us talk about. We will see you next week.
Happy reading.